We are neither nutritionists or medical providers. The topics discussed on this show are from our own research and experiences. Please consult your medical provider before attempting anything discussed on this show. Welcome to another episode of
Sjogren Strong. This is Brian.
And this is Lupe.
And this is your weekly podcast discussing how to live an active and healthy lifestyle despite a diagnosis of Sjogren's. So today we have Janet Church with us, and Janet's worked as a marketing executive for over 20 years in the tech space. She also currently chairs the board of directors for the National Sjogren's Foundation and has been blogging since early 2016 on Sjogren's syndrome. Janet, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Janet.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to take part in Sjogren Strong.
We appreciate you coming on.
Janet, tell us a little bit about yourself. You also have Sjogren's?
Yes, I do. I've had Sjogren's for, I think quite a bit longer than I've been diagnosed, which is a common story for most of us. But I've been diagnosed for about 14 years now, 13 or 14 years.
Wow. What were your some of your symptoms?
So it's very interesting that whatever brought people to seek the diagnosis of Sjogren's is kind of their group of symptoms have continued to be kind of my hotspot. So my symptoms certainly were dryness. I just didn't recognize it as such. Early on, my very early symptoms were consecutive and ongoing sinus infections that I could not cure. And I had 2 surgeries to try to remedy the problem. And the doctor just couldn't figure out why I was continuing with these sinus infections. At that time, I did not go to another doctor, a rheumatologist or immunologist, to try to see why that was. And I just kept on working. And it wasn't until the disease progressed quite aggressively into a lot of dryness, both eye and mouth, that I started to seek help, still did not get help. And then finally, I had what's called a cataclysmic event where my body just started shutting down and I was hospitalized and had what I now know was aseptic encephalitis and meningitis, which is not a common thing with Sjogren's, but it is something that can occur. So I finally got a diagnosis.
At the hospital?
Actually, not at the hospital. I actually had every single doctor except a rheumatologist, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks and had a long road to try to recover after getting out of the hospital. It even took me a while to be able to walk again. That took another couple of weeks. And I continued to seek a diagnosis and finally saw a Mayo Clinic diagnostician who read my, at that point, very, very thick file and said, the only doctor you have not seen is a rheumatologist. I think you might have an autoimmune disease. And I was then diagnosed within 3 days of tests coming back from my rheumatologist.
It's amazing that all these group of doctors, they didn't know what was wrong.
It was pretty amazing because I had an infectious disease doctor. I had a neurologist. They were considering doing brain surgery, which, I'm glad they didn't. And every sort of doctor was around the bedside without a rheumatologist. Hopefully, more people get diagnosed without that particular journey. That's what we want in the future. Faster diagnosis.
A lot of the people that we've talked to, they say like they don't have any symptoms until maybe they have an operation or a big infection, and that's when the disease kind of wakes up, for lack of a better word.
Like it's almost a trigger.
Yeah, that's the word. It's almost a trigger.
It can be. And I had always considered, once diagnosed, and when I took a look at my history and my journey and my major stress events, I really thought it was major stresses that kicked the Sjogren's gene on. But now I'm really not sure, because when I talk to pediatric rheumatologists and talk about some of the things that are common symptoms for children, I actually had a couple of common symptoms that no one ever really thought much about. But I didn't get seriously ill until I just piled more and more life on and more stress on, and my body just went a little nuts.
And you thought it was just life?
I thought, well, at the time where I first started around those sinus infections and starting to get really tired, I had been in the technology industry for quite some time. I had been CEO of a marketing technology company, and I had a lot of stress because of the industry. What they say about the industry is very true about the stress level. And I just really thought I was burned out and done. And then when I sold my company and moved on from that company, I got worse. And even right before my major hospital event, there were a few weeks I was sleeping 15, 17 hours a day, knowing something was really not right with that, that's just not being tired. So it has been a very interesting journey. And I think my major stress events, which I did have some significant stress events, really added to how hard the disease decided to come on.
So operating as an executive for as long as you had, you wrote, which this doesn't surprise me, you face challenges head on, gathering information and performing to the best of your ability. What do you think is the main contributing factor to have that mentality to see a challenge, come up with a solution, and continue to move forward?
You mean, how can I apply that, being used to that type of executive function? How do I apply that to living with my disease?
More so, do you think having operated as an executive, did that make you look at Sjogren's as just a challenge like you would something in a boardroom to continue to move on? Or has your mindset changed with Sjogren's to be able to push forward like you do?
I have really oscillated on that very topic and have come to peace in some regards with my Sjogren's, because my journey is, once diagnosed, I felt great relief. I mean, there was a period in the hospital, when I was in the hospital, we were actually fighting for my life. So, at that point, it's like, what the heck is going on to cause me to be this ill? Including there is about a week there that I don't remember anything and having any thoughts about that whatsoever. But in coming back out and finally getting a diagnosis, I was super excited for a diagnosis, which is not uncommon, because my instant reaction is, aha, I know what I have. Now I can fix it, which is using my executive experience in the past and business experience of seeing a problem and coming up with some ways to solve it. So, of course, I'm sure there are some people that are going to be listening that might get a chuckle out of this, because that doesn't actually work. You can't muscle yourself out of this. And it took me some time to go through the grieving process, because I also had to first accept that some basic parts of my personality, seeing a problem, trying to solve it, wasn't going to work. So something that was so fundamental to my personality just wasn't a tool that was going to provide much of a solution for me. So I really had to figure out, what is a way that I can come to terms with this disease? I think I even wrote it. There is an old Moisture Seekers from the foundation where I write about this and talk about that I essentially had to, instead of fight this thing, come up with how I'm going to solve this, how I'm going to eradicate this little beast out of me. I actually turned the exact opposite to say, how am I going to love this? How am I going to calm this reactive thing inside of me? How am I going to calm it down? Because I had that thought that I'm fighting something, so I'm exacerbating it. Maybe I need the opposite approach. There's been different points in time throughout the 15 years of facing my own personality to see when some of my natural skill sets work and when they don't, and then trying to determine what might help me more.
Are you into mindfulness and meditation? Yeah. If you would describe how mindfulness and meditation and anything else you might do along those lines helps you with your illness.
Absolutely. Now, it is really interesting because I talk to a lot of patients and a lot of rheumatologists and people in general around autoimmune disease. And it is always wonderful to hear other people's journeys, but also to know where you are in your own journey when you hear someone else's story. And so I came to mindfulness, later, and meditation a little bit later in my journey because I was still going through the grief process. So I think, when people listen to other stories, it is a good practice to consider, where am I in my own journey here and what do I need to move forward? But meditation is something that I could encourage everyone to try to practice, because what it fundamentally does, there's so much research on the power of meditation that everyone can Google, but the meditation practice completely helps me to calm and center myself, my mind and my body, and allow me to be in a place to respond to what I hear or what I feel or to what I experience instead of react to it. So I find this very, very useful when my disease is activating in a way that is causing me to feel reactive. And a not uncommon one for me is anxiety, and spending a little bit on anxiety of what's in the future. Am I going to be able to do that? Can I achieve some things that I want to achieve? Am I going to be cut down short from that because I'm going to get sicker? And, the what if. And that does not serve me now. So the practice of meditation helps to reduce that anxiety, which also can help reduce my experiences of tipping into any depression, which I have done. So the meditation itself, and I couple it with yoga, and when I'm really busy and I get off of my actual practice of yoga and meditation, I feel the anxiety can rise back up. I feel the reactive space of being reactionary to what someone might say or what I might hear in the news, which can make one reactive at the, for where we are right now. And the meditation does help me make sure that I am considering something, considering other perspectives, responding with thought and calm, just not letting my brain go too far awry.
How many times a week do you yoga and meditate? And how hard is it to quiet the mind?
You know what's great about meditation? Many people believe, if they're not in a current meditation practice, that, I'm not good at meditation because I can't quiet my mind. That's the actual point of meditation. It is a practice. It is something one has to work on and get better at, just like if you're doing push-ups, you might be able to do 2 at the start, but if you keep working on that, you build actual muscle. And being able to train your mind to not go into kind of the circular pattern of listening to your own thoughts, it takes practice. So when I am practicing every day, and just 15 minutes a day will do it for me, I'm doing great. Right now, I'm not actually doing that. So you ebb and flow into this when you get busy, and then you realize, oh, I'm feeling kind of agitated inside. There's too much going on. And it's like, I haven't really been keeping up on my practice.
Right.
And yoga, I do yoga every morning when I get up, simply because I'm so stiff and my joints hurt so much. It helps relieve that. And then I often sit down and meditate right afterward, because yoga is about bringing together the spirit, mind, and the body. That's what yoga actually is. And I do a real slow yoga. I'm a big believer in yoga to quiet the body.
I've said it before on the show that I wish I could meditate, and I've tried for a while. I've been disciplined enough to, give it that good old try for days upon days. And I just can't get past the fact that when I close my eyes and I start some deep breathing, it's okay. The dishes still need to be done. Did the dogs have treats? Did I do their flea medication? What? And I just, after 5 minutes of that, I'm like, okay, now my mind's tired and I need to take a nap.
So you don't get anything done.
Yeah, and then I still don't check the dog medication.
Tools to help people who are challenged. There are guided meditations, so where you're listening to someone else's voice, or where you're listening to music that is even composed on a particular beat that might be at a certain heartbeat rate to help calm your body, because you will get into sync with a beat. So perhaps you haven't found the tool that could help you best.
Janet, because you blog, right?
Yes, not as much as I'd like to, but I do blog. Yes.
Why did you start blogging and about Sjogren? How did that come about?
Well, it really came about because I gave a keynote speech at a national patient conference, for the Sjogren Foundation National Patient Conference a number of years ago. And everybody asked me to make the speech available to them. And the very first posts you see are that speech. And I developed the speech and continue blogging because I've had to work so hard on my own journey to figure out how I'm going to deal with this, to figure out how to manage the emotional impact and the physical. The emotional impact is more difficult for me than the physical impact. I do have physical aspects to the disease, but it's the emotional impact that causes me greater difficulty. So the time that I've spent trying to figure it out for myself and trying to be thoughtful and introspective about that, and talk to so many people that I've talked to, therapists, rheumatologists, different doctors, different patients, to try to figure it out, I just heard more and more that I wasn't particularly unique. So I thought, well, if I spent time kind of thinking through this stuff, maybe it'll help some other people shortcut some time on their own journey. Because if I can help somebody with just one new thought, one new perspective that helps them, that would be wonderful. So that's why I blog. I also blog to share, one of my more recent ones. I spend a lot of care in trying to be as good to myself as I can, to try to control things to the best of my ability. And yet, Sjogren's will still rear its ugly head and knock me down. And I couple months ago wrote a blog about how I've been so careful, so perfect patient to be prepared for a social event that I couldn't do. And it wasn't a large social event. It wasn't like a gala event. It was one of my best friend's family birthday party. And my friend's daughter is a goddaughter, and she was visiting, and I was going to see her and celebrate a birthday. And I simply couldn't even drive there. And I got very angry at Sjogren's. And so I blogged about it, kind of showing that, wow, even those of you who read my blog and think after all these years, I don't get angry at it. In fact, I do. We are all human in our journey, and none of us, we can all try to do better with living with our disease, but none of us want this disease. So it sometimes kind of does take us by surprise, and we have every right to be angry or sad about that.
Yeah, I've had Sjogren's for 10 years, and I think I have it under control. And you're right, it just out of nowhere it comes out and it drops me on my butt, So
yep.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
I sleep a lot. I do get angry, depression, anxiety. I think we all go through that. So you kind of just have to write it out, because we all go through it.
On I guess somewhat of that topic, in your blog, you have titles like Relapse to Reinvention, Life with an Autoimmune Disease, Self-Sabotage and Sjogren's Symptoms, Cause and Effect, and When Major Grief and Autoimmune Disease Collide. And they all kind of have an underlying theme of grief. And can you talk to us about that, the grief involved with a chronic illness, and how you've dealt with the grieving process?
Yeah, there is a grieving process. It is a very unusual state to have part of your life, and in my case, one of my favorite parts of my life, killed, but you're still here. You're like, okay, now who am I without that? Now who am I, to move forward into life? So I think there is a lot of grief with it. I know all of us have grief around what has been lost. I tend to create titles and blogs. You can actually look at my blog and you can kind of see where Sjogren's knocked me off my feet. And it made me angry, or it made me sad, or I hit depression. There's a blog on that, so it's, blogging for me, writing for me is also an outlet, and just putting my thoughts down is an outlet, but, and an outlet for processing my own grief. For those people who journal, they're just not making it necessarily public, but I hope their journaling is an outlet for their grief. But loss does keep rearing its head. And with Sjogren, there are times when the disease also advances. And so there are new phases of loss. And hopefully you can do really well on medications, do well on your stress control. I have found that stress factors are a major part of how bad my disease will show up. But whenever something happens, you may find yourself going into grief. And that is just kind of part of the beast. The actual grief process of being newly diagnosed is very different than the grief process of living a while with it. And I'd love to make that point so people understand they're kind of two different things, or I believe them to be two different things. They're still grief, but one is a new process and one is remembering a process. And the longer you live with the disease, the faster you might get through the phase of anger, or if something else is a challenge. That one article on when grief and Sjogrens collide, that article was actually a different grief scenario. It was the grief of my father dying. So I was grieving being at the bedside of my father. And what happened was my Sjogren luckily behaved during his death process and during the preparation of his funeral, but literally the day of his funeral, and luckily I could push through it, but my Sjogrens really activated. And it was because of the month's stressors. So life still happens with Sjogrens. Those stressors certainly affect your disease and might even cause you to go into not only a disease activation, a flare-up, but other emotional challenges because other stressors activated the disease. That's something every person needs to figure out how to help themselves through that.
Definitely.
In my life, my father passed with lymphoma when I was 17. And that was probably the first time obviously watching a loved one deteriorate as he did, but having really cycled through the grieving process. And then obviously I've had other family members who have passed, to date. And with Lupe and being along on this journey with her, I don't know. I don't look at me going through a grieving process. It's just plans change. And I'm guessing that's because there's a disconnect because I'm not the one affected living. I can't say affected or living with because I am, but I'm not the one dealing with the physical symptoms. So, I get dressed, I hop a shower, I come out and we're ready to go and she's sleeping. Okay. Plans change. And it's nothing I get angry or upset about. It's just, I understand what's happening to her physically and plans change. I mean, and that's probably the biggest impact other than, not having much meat in the house. Those are probably the two biggest impacts on my life with her. Now, obviously it saddens me to watch her, especially when she's in flare. It saddens me to watch her do that. And I do everything that I'm capable of doing to ease the pain and make her comfortable and make sure she's resting comfortably. And so she can get through that so we can get back to, a normal life. But so when I was reading about some of the grief you were writing about, it kind of caused me to stop and think about, it and grief that I've experienced in my life before and how somebody with the chronic illness is possibly going through, these 5 stages of grief continually.
Brian has always been very understanding, but since we've been doing the podcast and we do research for, whatever topic we want to talk about, he's learned a lot and he's very understanding.
I can tell by listening to the podcast, it's pretty wonderful to hear the partnership that you guys have in your marriage. Mm-hmm. And you do sound understanding, Ryan. And Lupe, you do sound like you're not giving up on life, which some patients get stuck in a place of grief, stuck in too much anger or stuck in resignation that they just can't move forward. And both of you seem to be really wonderful examples for the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, we're usually pretty happy. I'm happy. I'm always in a good mood. Just when I'm in flare, Brian's looking at me like, really? No, you should have seen his face. No, but it was funny. I should have taken a picture.
She's always in a good mood.
Okay.
You
Back it
sound
up.
like you're a naturally happy person, and that's wonderful.
For the most part, I'm always in a good mood. But when my Sjogren's is acting up, I just get really tired and irritated, and it just happens. It just happens out of nowhere. It's just one of those things you just don't know.
Well, it is one of those things, and it is good for people to remember that when you're in flare, your body is completely inflamed. That includes your brain. and your vagus nerve, your body is completely inflamed. And inflammation has an impact on your brain, on the exhaustion you feel, on any feelings of depression, because I know it's not uncommon that when you feel a flare, you can feel depression. Right. That's a lot of inflammation going on, especially if you, outside of a flare, the depression feeling or the sadness or however someone titles that goes away if you feel okay. And for those people who, when the flare reduces and that doesn't feel okay, I really hope they are getting help with that so they can, enjoy more of life and just get that support, because there's so many different avenues for support.
A lot of people do get stuck, but a lot of people, I don't think they have a support system or,
yes.
Their family, whoever is really close to them, they just don't understand. You're just lazy, basically what it is, right? That's what people think.
Yeah. Whenever I hear that, my heart just hurts. That just hurts, and for them. And people are in those situations. And everybody has to choose how to handle that situation for themselves. Mm-hmm. But, I hope people can find ways to change that dynamic, with whatever tools are available to them. Because everybody deserves support.
That's right. That's right.
I think this is a good segue to our last question. You wrote way back then in that 2015 May issue of Moisture Seekers, "No is a complete sentence and it's okay." And that,
yes.
And that is something.
I wish I followed my own advice much more than I do. But yes, no is a complete sentence and it is okay.
You don't have to explain why no, it's just no.
Yeah.
So basically, that's what it is.
It is harder for people with children. You can't say no to small children. There are things around that statement that people need to adjust for themselves, and I understand that. But yes, with friends or with people asking additional things outside of whatever your plan is for your life to be healthy, and healthy in every sense of the word. Anything outside of that basic plan that is your priority, no is a great complete sentence.
It's funny because sometimes we'll plan on going on a hike, and I watch the weather, pretty intensely leading up to the day we're going to hike, and we start hydrating days before, and weather's just turning, and it's not going to be good for us. It's going to be too hot, too sunny. I can't find a suitable area to hike in where we're not going to deal with the heat. And I'll tell her, no, we shouldn't hike. And she gets so upset.
Well, I spent 3 days packing for my hike.
So she needs to learn that no is a complete sentence and it's okay.
Even if it's coming from your support system.
That can be true. I have another saying, though, which I always intend to write a blog post on. I don't know if you all saw the U.S. News and World Report article last year that my journey was featured in that. But the other concept that I try to keep in mind is, how can I live life on the edge of the cliff? And the cliff being, if I push one more step, I'm going to fall off and have a flare or a relapse. Because there's also a tendency to say no so much because you're afraid that you're going to flare, that you leave some unlived life on the table. And for some people, that's a sadness. For me, that would make me sad. So I often am testing a boundary with caution. It's like, do I have to say no to that? Could I push a little more and really have fun? And that's if the situation sounds like fun, sounds like it adds to my life. And sometimes I do push through that and have no adverse effect at all, or just need a little extra nap the next day, or if it's a weekend. So I also like people to know that sometimes you got to test that no boundary to make sure you're not leaving some life unlived. Know that everything, all the dreams we want, they're still possible. We might have to get to them a little differently, or it might take a little longer than before we got ill, but our dreams are still our dreams.
And we still have to follow our dreams, chase them.
We've made changes to where, we no longer hike on a Sunday because Monday's a work day. So if we're going to do something physical, we choose Saturday. That way we have Sunday to recover if need be. And that probably goes along that same line. Yes, we're going to push ourselves, but we're also going to leave that buffer in case, we do push a little too hard. At least we have a day to recoup.
Perfect example. Yeah, absolutely.
Remember one time I pushed myself too hard and I was in bed for like a week.
Yep.
Well, I went for it was a hike and a bike ride. Like Saturday I went on a hike, Sunday I went on a bike ride, and
she was done.
Yeah. But it was fun. Can't take that away from me.
And hopefully while you were recouping that week, you were thinking about that fun.
Exactly. And I took pictures, and I was looking at my pictures. So, yeah.
So, Janet, we really appreciate your time and you coming on Sjogren Strong. And we want to give you the opportunity, if you could say one thing to somebody newly diagnosed, what would that be?
Whatever you're feeling and wherever you're at, it is okay. And it will be okay. There are many people who understand you, who are available to help. Reach out to the Sjogren's Foundation and know that you will find your way to your new normal and continue being exactly who you are.
Thank you, Janet. Those are great words.
I hope that for everyone.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Well, thanks again, Janet. We do appreciate it.
Thank you. You guys are awesome. What a fun couple to talk with. And I sure hope that not only Sjogren's patients listen to your podcast, but partners and family members to hear some great examples of the journey and what a great supportive relationship around Sjogren's can be. So thank you.
It makes a world of difference. Understanding Sjogren's norms change and that it's okay to feel whatever it is you're feeling are great takeaways from this episode. Surround yourself with a supportive community and start every day with a smile. Until next time, sip constantly and stay hydrated.